In this video, I'm going to show you how to create pivot tables in an actual table, and this is something that hopefully you have viewed in the previous video over tables, sorting, filters, and subtotals. So your first row is always going to contain your field names. So in this situation, we have in this sheet, we have a list of last names, first names, their gender, height, in feet and inches, weight, instrument, class that they're in, and whether they received a scholarship or not and how much. So this is just a list of band members and what they play as far as the instrument and what class they're in. So again, this is set up as an actual table. Even though it has not been defined as a table, you have the first row is always the field names, and then the rest of the rows contain the records, and then you have the information broken down into fields. So just make sure you have any of these fields selected, but you don't want to highlight anything. So just make sure one of these fields is active. To create a pivot table, you're going to go to the Insert tab. From the Insert tab, you're going to go to Pivot Table. You do have recommended pivot table, but let's do the pivot table command first. And once we click on Pivot Table, you're going to have this dialog box, and there's three options. You have choose the data that you want to analyze, and you'll see that it's making it an absolute reference, and it's also identifying the sheet that it's on. Usually it'll pick up your table very quickly. You don't need to convert it to a table, so note that this was not converted to a table at all. If you want to use any external data source, this could be coming from database programs, SQL, you can go ahead and choose that. And if you want to, the second option here then is to put it on a new worksheet or put it as part of this existing worksheet. We're going to go ahead and create a new worksheet. Now the last option is to choose whether you want to analyze multiple tables. This is something where you can actually have tables on other sheets that you want to use and combine that data into this pivot table option. But we're going to only use this one table. So we're going to go ahead and keep all of our defaults as is and click OK. You can see that it's going to create a new sheet called Sheet 1. Now your screen has changed quite a bit. You have up here at the very top of the screen, you have Pivot Table Tools with two tabs, the Analyze and the Design. And then directly below to the right, you now have a Pivot Table Field pane. And then to the left, you'll see a diagram on showing how to build your pivot table. What we're going to do is we're going to work to the right-hand side on our pivot table fields at this point. Now you're going to notice that that first row of data, which is your field names or your header row, contains all of the fields that you can pull the information from, and if you had more tables to choose from, then you can choose more tables. So you can create a pivot table and combine the data from multiple sheets. Down below at the very bottom, this is where you're going to identify where to place each of the information. Now, what I usually do is I build from the outside in, and what I mean by that is I identify what I want to have in my columns, what I want to have in my rows, and then I fill in the numbers in the middle, and that would be through the value section. And then if I want to do any filtering, then I can use that filter section. So the easiest way to do this is just to go ahead and drag where you want those fields to be located. So I think what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and choose the instrument, and I'm just going to click on Instrument, and if I click on the checkbox to the left of it, it's going to place it as part of the row labels. Then I'm going to go ahead and choose Class. Now note it put class down underneath rows as well. Now if that's not where I want it, we can move it around later. Then I'm going to go ahead and choose Scholarship. And then by choosing Scholarship, because it does contain a data type called values, it assumes that it goes into the values section. So at this point you can see it's already building the table or the pivot table with the information from the filter sheet. Now the reason why they call it a pivot table is because you can move things around. So for example, let's say I don't want it structured this way where I have it broken down by the instrument and then within each instrument broken down by class. Maybe I would like to have my class going across the top as columns. So I'm just going to click and drag on my field name columns from the row section to the columns section, and then I can easily change the appearance of this pivot table. So now it allows me to adjust the appearance of it. So I have my row labels, which are the instruments. I have my column labels, which are the class that they belong in, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And then note I also have a grand total as well. So there's a lot of ways you can just customize this based on what you're trying to communicate just by including fields, dragging them to different locations within the area section of the pane, or removing them altogether. Now what we can also do is we can do some filtering. So let's say that we want to filter on class. I can drag it over to the filters section, and you can see how quickly my table changes. And now I have in row 1, I have my filter button, and I can go ahead and say just show me all the freshmen. And so now it breaks it down by showing me these are all the freshmen in each of these areas of instruments and the scholarship. And note that you have the filter button. I can go back and choose all, and then I have all. If I don't want to include anything in filters, I can click and drag this wherever I want. And if I want to remove it, I can click on the arrow down to the right of the field name, and I can choose remove field. So there's a lot of different ways that you can handle this. It all depends on what you're trying to communicate. Now what I'm going to do also, I'm going to go ahead and take that class. I'm going to click on the checkbox. You can create basically sub-menus here at this point, or subcategories, and that happens when you put 2 or more fields in the same area of the pivot table. So if I want to, I can go ahead and do some sorting at this point. So we have a lot of those options available to us. If I want to reverse this and maybe have class be the main category and have instrument the subcategory, or the primary fields secondary fields, then I can just switch those field names around just by a simple click and dragging at this point. Note you have your collapse buttons, and you can collapse those if you want to. You can also expand them just by clicking on the plus sign and expanding as well. So again, it all depends on what you're trying to communicate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move the class back over the columns, and we'll go ahead and keep it as columns. Now, some other things you can do is you can change the way that you're going to display the actual values. So you can see we have this broken down where we've got grand totals. We can go ahead to the value section of the pivot table pane, click on the drop down menu or the arrow, and go to value field settings. Now when you go to value field settings, what you're going to do is you're going to get 2 tabs. You can actually do different types of calculations. So if I don't want to do a sum, let's say I want to count how many individuals I have in the freshman class that are doing the bass drum, I can change the type of calculation to count and click OK. And now you have a count function that's being applied. And note what it says in the values section for that field. It now changes it from sum of scholarship amount to count. I'm going to click on that drop down menu and go back to value field settings. And let's go ahead and change it to sum. The other thing you can do is you can come up here and customize the title of that column, and you can just indicate total scholarship amount. And you can also add formatting to those numbers as well. So if you click on the number format button, then it's going to bring up the format dialog box and go ahead and allow you to choose the formatting that you want to apply. We'll go ahead and choose currency, and we'll take out the decimal places, and we'll choose OK, and then we'll click OK again. And at this point you can just continue adding if you want to. We don't need to include any of these others. If we want to include the gender, we can go ahead and include the gender, and we can filter by gender. So I just dragged the filter, or the gender field to the filter section. So if I want to see how many females I have in the band, I can go ahead and choose females. We can also go ahead and choose all as well. And again, if you don't want any of these fields in here, you can just click on the drop down menu and you can choose remove field, and that's how you can remove it. So pivot tables allow you to do a lot of different things and have a lot of flexibility. Something else you can do, if you note on the Analyze tab here to the left, you can give your pivot table a name. You can also do what we call grouping and ungrouping. Okay, oh, sorry about that. And we can also add a slicer as well. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Insert Slicer, and let's say that I want to filter by the gender. I can click that field name, and then at this point I can go ahead and you can see that you have a slicer menu. I can click on the M for female, where it's just sorting through one gender over another, and I can go ahead and clear that. If I want to get rid of the slicer, as long as it's selected, I can go ahead and press the delete key. Now the other thing that you can do with pivot tables besides working with some of the features that you have on the Analyze tab. You can also go ahead and check out the recommended pivot tables as well. So if you choose recommended pivot tables, we'll give you a lot of really neat ideas on how you can lay the data out. And this is really a quick way how you can generate a lot of tables with that information. So we'll go ahead and we'll choose this one here. Count of last name by class, and then we'll click OK. Now I don't know why you'd want to do that, but again, that's something that just to show you that you can do the recommended. Now I just did a Control Z to undo, or you click on the undo button from the bar at the top. The other thing you can do, if you go to design, you can make a lot of changes to this as well. So if you want to add any subtotals, you can add some subtotals. You can add grand total as well. Alright, and actually we have that already turned on for us. You can change out the column headings, you can do the banding of the columns and bandings of the rows. So it's whatever you want to do as far as adding those different features to it. Now, one thing I do want you to keep in mind when you are working with tables, there's going to be times when the data changes. So if you've added some information in this table, it doesn't necessarily include it in the pivot table. It doesn't at all include it in the pivot table. You would have to refresh that information. So I'm going to go ahead and change one of these numbers. I'm going to change the scholarship amount for the last student who is a senior to, let's just go outrageous with it. Let's make it $10,000. Not enough scholarship money. Now we're going to come over here to the sheet 1 where we have the pivot table. And you can see for senior, let's see, it would be this one number here, it hasn't changed. So one of the things you have to keep in mind is that if the data in the table changes, it does not update the pivot table. You have to do that manually. So you'll need to go to the Analyze tab, choose Refresh, and choose Refresh All. And then you can see now it's changed to 10,000. So keep that in mind that there is that dynamic of updating the data, but that's something you're going to have to initiate when that data does change. So you don't have to recreate the pivot table every time the data changes. So have fun with this one.